So I'll pass over to you, Alison.
Thank you very much, Mark. What I'm going to do first is just, I'm going to share my screen. So once I've got the presentation up, Mark, could you just confirm for me that you can see it okay and that that's worked?
Can't at the moment, but try
Okay.
again.
Just a minute, not quite there yet.
And we've also got Janet joining us now as well.
Okay, is that, can everyone see me? And can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right, so here we go. Mark, thank you very much for this invitation to talk about what's honestly one of my favorite subjects, mindfulness and pain. And I'll start straight away by saying that, you might be forgiven for wondering why on earth anybody would want to be mindful about pain. But my aim is to demonstrate why I think mindfulness is actually one of the most important skills that someone who has chronic pain can possess. I'm intending to talk for about 40 minutes. If I could just ask if anybody's got any questions, they could pop them in the chat, and I'm very happy to stay on as long as anybody wants afterwards, talking about pain, and talking about mindfulness and answering any questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a bit about what pain is and why we get it. And I'm going to talk about it from a nerve anatomy and physiology point of view. I'm going to talk a bit about what the research tells us in terms of the role of mindfulness, and from my perspective, what I think mindfulness is and what it isn't. And I'm also going to try and talk you through just a few practical applications of mindfulness that I use with my clients. So, what on earth gives me the right to talk about this topic? I've been a qualified chiropractor for 20 years. So I have spent most of the last 20 years working with people in chronic pain and studying pain and studying the impact it has on people's lives. For most of the last 15 years, I was actually based in India. I founded one of the country's first chiropractic clinics, and that picture of me appeared on a huge, great billboard in front of millions of people, because I was part of a team that used to offer free chiropractic care at a major religious event. Now, I trained as a mindfulness teacher about 6 years ago, but I've been a meditator for as long as I can remember. So long that when somebody asked me recently about, do some posts on social media about how you got started, and well, I couldn't really remember. But I trained in mindfulness because I began to feel very strongly. The more I worked with people in pain, the more I knew about it, the more it seemed apparent that it was really important for people who are in pain to be able to have some skills to help themselves. And that active care, and by active care means you have to take part. You have to do something about the situation yourself. And what a lot of the research shows us is that active care gets better long-term results. It gives people a better chance of making long-term progress. And the research also shows us that when people know something about pain, when they've got a better idea of what's going on, and they've got some skills, it's surprising to find you actually have got more control over the situation than you realize. And I'm going to share some of that knowledge and skills now. So I'm deliberately using the term chronic pain here. In modern parlance, it's also referred to as persistent pain, but I still find that most people understand the term chronic better than they understand persistent. It's a really, really common problem. You're looking at 30% of the population, and a recent study said By 2040, you'll be looking at 1 in 5 people with some sort of chronic pain. And so, you know what, we all know somebody living with pain, and that 30% rises as you get older. It rises depending on where in the country you live. Unfortunately, it's more common in areas that are socioeconomically deprived. And it rises with gender too. If you're a woman over 40, it's more than 30%. You're talking about 20 million people in the UK at a cost of about £15 billion a year. Now, what I want everyone to understand is pain is actually, for most of us, a normal part of being a human being. We are supposed to have sensitivity to pain. It's a protective mechanism. That's what it's there for. And we've all had what I call what's known as acute pain. That's what you get when you've just fallen over. You've just. Oh, can I just ask if it's possible to, Martin, I don't know if you can hear me, but it might be yours that needs muting. I don't know if I can hear background from anyone. We've all had acute pain. That's what you get when you fall over. Sorry, I shouldn't have gone. It's what you get when you fall over. It's what you get when you stub your toe. And you usually know exactly what you've done. You know why you've got pain. And it hurts a lot at the area that you've hurt, but it tends to get quite a lot better quite quickly as the tissue heals. Now, chronic pain is similar, and it's also very different. Its only really defining quality is it's gone on for more than 3 months. It can be secondary and it can be primary. Secondary chronic pain is when somebody has a defined health condition that's likely to give them ongoing problems. I work with quite a lot of people who've got rheumatoid arthritis. That's an example of a secondary chronic pain. They've got a disease condition. But there's also primary chronic pain. And primary chronic pain, sometimes there's a triggering event, sometimes there's a trauma, an accident, but you know, sometimes it comes from nowhere. And sometimes there isn't a clear reason why people have got it. And a lot of back and neck pain is primary chronic pain. And there's a big overlap between chronic pain and mental health. That's not really surprising. 40% of people will report some sort of anxiety or depression in relation to pain. And we've had a bit of a chat about this already, Sarah, what you and I were talking about, that some of the medical solutions have mixed results. Surgery, for example, for back problems doesn't always get a great outcome. There can be problems with long-term medication use, either through unexpected side effects or just attenuation. Medicine stops working over time. And it's considered more and more important that people have options for self-management, that they have choices. And I think mindfulness has a lot to offer in this area. So let me shed what light I can on what we know about what causes pain. And I'll start right at the beginning by, reiterating what I just said. We don't actually always know. But it does seem to involve, and I'm keeping this relatively simple here, but some sort of dysfunction in how the nervous system processes information, so that the nervous system comes to regard inputs and stimulus that aren't dangerous as though they are dangerous. Now, I've got a little diagram of your nervous system here, and I always think it's a bit like a tree. I like gardening analogies for mindfulness anyway, so gardening analogies work for me. But you've got this top area here, the brain, and you've got your trunk, your spinal cord, and that's your central nervous system. And then you've got all these branches coming out at the side, spread throughout the body. And then you've also got roots going down, which you can't see in the picture, but they're there. And that's your peripheral nervous system. And essentially, you've got sensors in your body that pick up all sorts of internal sensation and external sensation. And you've got special sensors, for example, for light waves so that you can see, and sound waves so you can hear. And you've got special sensors for things like temperature, so you know if something's hot or cold. You know what? We don't have any pain sensors. And this has been a poorly understood area. What we have are sensors for tissue damage. But on their own, it's been shown that just having tissue damage alone is not enough to give you pain. Clearly, tissue damage can cause pain, but it's not enough on its own. When information from tissues arrives at the spinal cord quite simply can choose not to pass the information on. It can block it. Or it can choose to send it on up to the brain in an amplified form. And that's what we think is happening with chronic pain, that signals are getting amplified. But quite simply, if the cord decides not to pass information onto the brain, if the information doesn't get to your brain, you don't feel it. Which is an interesting one, because it does mean that in some respects, quite literally, pain's all in your head. And I don't want anybody to run off with the wrong impression from that, all right? Pain is always real, but it does always involve the brain. Now, before I go on, I read recently a lovely quote. It's written originally by the essayist Nassim Taleb, but it was quoted by a pain specialist, and he said, you know, studying neurobiology to understand humans is like studying ink to understand literature. So let's dig a little bit deeper into this. There's all sorts of interesting documentary cases that play around with this idea of, you know, what happens when we've got tissue damage. There are documentary cases of soldiers on battlefields seeing blood on their uniform, and they think it's somebody else's. They don't realize that they're hurt. And that's an example of the brain deciding that right at that precise moment, given everything else that's going on, whatever the injury is, it's not important, because there's too much else to think about. Similarly, you can have a great deal of pain with no tissue damage at all. There's an off-cited case study, it was in the British Medical Journal, of a construction worker, jumps off a scaffold, lands on a piece of wood, nail comes up through his foot. And he's looking down at his boot, and he's got a nail coming right up through his boot. And he's collapsed on the floor in agony. He's not being helped by all his colleagues, who are all standing around, all also looking very distressed. An ambulance is called. They get him to hospital. They get the boot off. He's still in agony. When they get his boot off, the nail has missed his foot. It's gone between his toes. But as far as that guy was concerned, as far as his brain was concerned, there was perfectly credible evidence that he was seriously injured, and that was enough. Because the human pain system, it's an alarm system. Its job's to protect us. And it's meant to go off when there's a problem and shut up when there isn't, but it doesn't always work perfectly. And sometimes it can be a bit like a car alarm, where you want it to go off when somebody's trying to break in, but it can get into a situation where it's going off every time somebody walks past. And that's not ideal. So what I'd like to just say a little bit about is, why does the alarm system get into such a mess? And really, when it comes to pain, everything matters. I've got a little drawing here that says biopsychosocial, BPS. This model's been around since, I think it was first published in 1977. Essentially, when your brain is trying to decide whether pain is an appropriate response, all kinds of things come into play. There's biology. Is there any tissue damage? Do you have any other illnesses? Genetics plays a part. And everything to do with your physical health and your physical situation matters. Yeah, it does. But psychology plays a part as well. And psychology includes your past experiences, your thoughts and feelings about pain, whether this is a problem you've had before and what happened last time. Your brain will pull on all your beliefs and all your expectations to actually form a prediction of how serious it thinks the situation is. And it's just like there's a big volume knob, and it can turn things up or it can turn things down. And social matters as well. Now, social is to do with your community links, your family relationships. It's to do with how easily you can get access to the medical care that you need. And essentially, all these factors come together. And just to make it absolutely clear, we know, for example, that ongoing stress can create low-grade inflammation in the body and can activate the same pathways as physical injury. But what I'd like you to take from this is the idea that basically no two people are the same. We all have different triggers. We all have things that create a sense of danger for us and things that create a sense of safety. By now, I hope you're wondering, what on earth's that picture of that kind of maypole with a blue sky doing there? Well, I'll give you a little example of somebody I once worked with in Goa. She was an older woman in a great deal of pain all over for 50 weeks of the year. But for 2 weeks of the year, she was not in any pain at all. What's going on in those 2 weeks? Well, I'll tell you what was going on in those 2 weeks. Her son and daughter-in-law, they lived abroad, they lived in the Gulf. And the 2 weeks she was fine were the 2 weeks that they were back with the children, with mum. For her, the presence of her family and being able to fulfill that role as the mum, that was enough of a safety in me signal that for those 2 weeks she didn't have any pain. And you're probably still wondering what the maypole's doing there. Well, what the maypole's doing there is that's actually a picture of the maypole that appears in Padstow in Cornwall on May Day. And that picture says family to me because I go to the May Day event in Padstow with my stepdaughters. Now, that picture probably doesn't say family to anyone else. But the other point about this story is that family is going to be a safety in me signal for some people, but for other people, time with their family might have the opposite impact, okay? So there isn't one size fits all. What does the research tell us? It's all right for me to talk about pain and for me to talk about the fact that mindfulness is one of the recognized interventions. But I always like there to be some meat on the bones. I'm a scientist by background and by training. And there's quite a few studies. There's about 40 years worth of studies into mindfulness and pain. And a number of studies have shown that fairly short courses of mindfulness will reduce both the level and intensity of pain and the emotional reaction to it, sometimes by as much as 50%. And people tend to feel they've got greater perceived control of their pain. it shouldn't really surprise us that other studies have shown that mindfulness reduces the anxiety and the depression that can often be associated with pain. And in some cases, it's been shown to reduce the use of medication as well. And it seems to have a long-lasting impact on pain control, which is really interesting because a lot of interventions for pain are not studied over the long term. Very, very recent study done in San Diego Medical School. It was published this year. They again found a 50% plus reduction in pain. What was interesting about this study is we're starting to be able to measure what's going on in the brain when people are in pain. And it's actually been shown that long-term pain does actually change the way different parts of the brain talk to each other. And what this San Diego Medical School study showed is where mindfulness was working was it was changing the way different parts of the brain talk to each other. It was changing the way the part of the brain that was receiving information about tissues was coordinating with the parts of the brain that decided what that information meant. So these researchers were able to show a very clear difference pre and post mindfulness, that they correlated with why people were getting positive impact on pain. And other studies in other areas of mindfulness have shown us that regular mindfulness practice is going to change your brain. It's going to change the structure and it's going to change the function. And pain, chronic pain in and of itself is an altered function in the nervous system. And honestly, if you can change it one way, you can change it back. There's some other studies that have looked at pain intensity in relation to what do we think about pain? What do we predict about it? How does it make us behave? And how much does somebody think they can help themselves? And the more, if you can, basically the conclusion was, the more you can help somebody get their head around their own experience of pain, the more you can encourage them to move when they can, and to be confident in their own capabilities in managing pain. All of this has a really positive effect on symptoms, and it reduces both pain intensity and disability if you provide knowledge and you provide skills. And I think mindfulness teaching can do that. So it seems only fair at this point just to say a little bit about how do I see mindfulness? How do I define it? What do I think it is? And I honestly find it really, really hard to define. I know Mark and I have had a few conversations because for me, it's very much something you do. It's experiential. I know somebody who's climbed Mount Everest, and he can talk to me about what it was like to climb, but I'll never really know because I haven't done it and I'm not intending to do it. And for me, mindfulness, it is very experiential and it is very personal as well. But this definition came from a piece of research, and I quite like it. You're being deliberate and you're being self-regulating, where you're putting your attention, and this orienting towards whatever shows up with curiosity, openness, and a willingness to accept it. One of my concerns about the word mindfulness is it gets people too focused here, and I think it's about really more about putting your mind back into the body, or putting the two together, because they do work together. I do liken it a little bit to keep fit for the mind, in the same way as that you'd work your body. It's a workout for the mind. And I like the notion that it teaches you to be an observer of what you're experiencing in a way that works. One of the things that happens with pain is that people tend to basically get stuck in one of two corners. There's a very kind of fearful corner. I can't do things because I've got a problem and it might hurt more. But there's an angry corner. There's a, why has this happened to me? I'm going to push on through. I'm not going to bother about this. And neither of those corners is particularly helpful when it comes to getting through pain and out the other side. And I think mindfulness gives people options to get curious without reacting to or judging the experience. And actually, in and of itself, just being prepared to sit and not actually do anything can be a powerful tool in helping you realize that you can cope better than you thought you could. And for me, it's about helping people be more creative, more flexible, be more response-able to whatever situation they find themselves in. There's a few things I've got down at the bottom that I don't think it is or it isn't necessarily. I was once asked, I was really put on the spot by somebody in India, asking me, did I teach from a Hindu or a Buddhist perspective? And I think I gaped a bit like a fish because I didn't know how to answer it. So I thought I'd better have an answer. And having thought about it a great deal, the answer for me is neither. I'm not a Swami. I don't speak Sanskrit. I can't go back to the original texts and teach from them. Don't speak Pali either. Not practicing Buddhist. If I teach from any philosophical tradition, it's Stoicism, because that's Greco-Roman, and I consider that my heritage. And I really like the Stoic perspective because the Stoics were very practical. They said that what they taught had to be workable wherever you were. You've got to be able to use it in the forum and in the marketplace. And I like that practicality. But for me, mindfulness isn't necessarily all about spiritualism or meditation, but there are plenty of people who teach from that tradition. It's also not about emptying your mind. Personally, I can't empty mine. I'm one of the world's great overthinkers. I have it to a fine art. So my mind is always on. And I really liked something that I heard fairly recently from the tennis player, Novak Djokovic, who talked about how he talked about his mind as a traveller. And he said, even in the middle of a big tennis match on a key point, he can find his mind's wandered off. And he has enough awareness to know how to gently bring it back to what he's doing at that moment. So for me, it's not about empty mind, because I don't manage that myself, but it is about being able to know when my mind has gone off into rabbit holes that really aren't useful and knowing how to bring them back. Hate to worry you people, but it's not always about feeling wonderful and calm and relaxed either. Recently, I was listening to Vijayamala Birch at Breathworks, and she's dealt with a lot of pain in her life, and she was talking about one of the big mistakes she felt she made using mindfulness was she used it as this has got to make my pain go away. And it's got to make my pain go away now. And it's taken me a while with some of the things I work with to realize that that's not the job of mindfulness. It's not always going to be nice and calming and relaxing. But it is an excellent way of stopping me making things worse than they already are. And it's not a magic wand. Spoiler alert, but when it comes to chronic pain, there aren't any. Not any, ever, anywhere. Mindfulness needs practice, consistent practice and consistent effort. But I do think it rewards that consistent practice and consistent effort. And if you put in the practice and the effort, it keeps giving. You never reach a point where you don't reach a point, unlike the medicine, where it doesn't help you anymore. It only helps more and more. So let's talk a little bit about how I think you can apply this. And I'll say, I'm going to give you 3 examples of how I apply it. But what I want to say straight up is there's no one size fits all. And I've had a lot of interesting conversations with medical professionals and other physical therapists about who do you decide, how do you decide who this is going to work for and who it won't. Because people do have to arrive with an open mind. So, and something that comes out of the research as well is that when you want to use mindfulness for pain, you've got to be able to apply it in a flexible way in terms of different treatment styles, different teaching styles, different tools, because there isn't going to be one that's going to land for everyone. But the thing about the human brain is we have a wonderful autopilot, which goes running away in the background all the time. It's a great thing to have. It helps us do complicated things. It helps us multitask, but it also traps us reacting and thinking in habitual ways that aren't always helpful. Because like I mentioned earlier with the nail in the foot example, your brain's actually always trying to predict what it thinks it's going to happen next. And it reacts and generates pain before it genuinely knows what's going to happen next. And what mindfulness does is it brings that automatic pilot into the light. You start to notice what kind of habitual loops you've got running in your head. And one of the things I encourage people to do is just think stop. You can just think the word stop, or as I read the other day from a coach friend of mine, oh, we don't do that now. Whenever she notices herself slipping into a habit that doesn't help her, she'll actually say to her mind, no, we don't do that now. Or no more attention needed now. The key thing is to stop the loop. And the S stands for stop. The T for take a breath, and the O for observe. And this can be, it's deceptively simple. It can be incredibly enlightening but difficult to do, because actually not doing what you habitually do takes far more effort than you might realize. And the thing is, the P is for proceed. What I often find in my own personal practice and with clients is when they get to the P, don't know what to do. They've stopped the train, but they don't know where to send it next. That's okay. My experience is that it is the act of stopping the habitual pattern of thinking that is the most powerful. And if you don't know what to do next, that's all right, just wait. And sometimes in my case, it'll be several days later, but the proceed comes popping through into the front of my brain. In other words, my brain's been working on it for 3 days behind the scenes, and it delivers the answer to me. And if you don't get an answer, it doesn't matter anyway, because it's the act of stopping the habitual pattern. And you know, I just want to reiterate here, it's not that thinking is necessarily good or bad, but what we're looking for is what's the workable thinking that's going to take you in the direction of less pain and more ease. Another story I tell, an idea that I introduce in my work, is this idea of secondary suffering. When it's taught in traditional courses, this is just described as the Arrow Sutta, which you could usefully say could be defined as pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Like I said earlier, we all have pain. That's the first arrow. We all have pain from time to time. Pain is a sensation. Suffering is the emotional distress and the responses that are triggered by the pain. And you can't always stop the pain, but you can usually do something to reduce the suffering. And mindfulness techniques of all different types encourage a kinder, more self-nurturing attitude to yourself. So if you are somebody who tends to get quite angry and quite frustrated about why me, mindfulness techniques can help you just put that down, let it go. If you are somebody who tends to get quite tense and stressed, mindfulness techniques can help you work out how that's affecting your body. And then you can make conscious choices about whether that's something that you want to continue. Is it helping you or not? Mindfulness, I think mindfulness can also really help by just helping people to get curious. And in a way, this is the very, very last thing most people with pain want to do. But mindfulness encourages you to get up close and personal with it. Put your arm around it. Get to know it. Get curious about it. And the way I tend to teach this is I'll use exercises where I get people to look at pain in a myriad of different ways. So I might ask somebody to kind of just visualize their pain, and I'll get them to tell me what color it is. What size is it? What shape is it? Is it on the surface of the body or is it deep? Is it static or does it move? And once they've got an image of it, then we start to move it. So what happens if you change the color? What happens if you move it away from the body? What happens if you bring it back in? What happens if you enlarge it? What happens if you make it smaller? What happens if you spin it? And not everybody will respond the same way. Some people find that if they make their pain larger, it disappears. But for other people, they need to make it smaller. For some people, it's color that really does it. I actually changed the original slide that I had for this because I had a picture on it that had more red. And then I was working with somebody and he said for him, this guy's very visual, the red was actually too triggering. He said, have a picture with less red, Alison. Because for him, red was pain. So that was interesting. So I changed this. The thing is, when you start to do these things, what you find is, firstly, pain is quite slippery. Very rarely is it static. It often moves and changes. And I've experienced this myself. Through the menopause, I had a lot of numbness and tingling in my hands. And if instead of panicking and worrying about it, I applied my mindfulness and got up close to it, what I would find is it would really change and move around. The amount of numbness, where it was, it would move a lot. So that was interesting. And really just being curious allows us to open up options for ourselves. And we can find out what works for us. And as I say, it won't be the same thing for everybody. But I've been a bit surprised by this exercise because when I started using it, I thought this is going to work really well for people who are very visual and find visualization easy. And I've been wrong. I haven't yet come across somebody who can't find a way to use it, even if they don't think they're very visual or they don't think they're very creative. So that's been interesting. And what it gives people are often surprised. They're surprised that they can actually exert some control. So, well, we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about chronic pain and what causes it. And we've talked about how important different aspects of somebody's experience can be. We've had a bit of a review of the science, and we've looked at some of the ways it can work. It's a dense subject. I hope I've given you enough today to prompt some thoughts and questions and some interest without completely overwhelming you. I post quite a lot on social media. I have a lot of stuff on my website, which you can see here. It's mindinsight.online. I'm very happy for anybody to connect with me and DM me or email me. And if you'd like just to have a complimentary chat, either, if you've got pain issues you'd like to have a chat with me about, it's no obligation. You can sign up on my website. I can talk for England on this subject, so just be warned. And I do a regular email if anybody's interested to sign up. But I'm just happy if people have learnt a bit today. That's good for me. The more I can do to spread the word, the better. Thank you, Mark. Shall I stop my screen share now?
Yes, if you don't mind. I'll leave it on so that people have got time to. Okay.
Oh, okay. Hang on.
If anyone wants your details, I'll make sure I send them, and if they didn't have a chance. But actually, I'll send everyone the recording. Janet, you joined a little bit later.
I'll just leave them up there for a minute, okay, and then tell me when you want me to take them down, Mark.
Yeah. So Janet, you joined a little bit later than everyone else, so you might not have been aware, but we have recorded this session, and if you want a recording of it, I'll happily send it to you, and it will be available on Mindful Therapy's site and Alison's site at some stage as well. No, thank you so much, Alison. That was great. I really do like your take on what mindfulness is and what mindfulness isn't. And a lot of the things you said resonate so much with me. And I talk about it in similar ways, but those little 4 pictures, they really emphasized a lot of the misunderstandings that people have, I think, about what mindfulness.
What bothers me, what worries me, if you like, is that sometimes people can be put off before they've even started. Either because they think they're going to be told it's all in their head. Nature of the beast is that I see a lot of people who've already been around the houses a bit. They've quite often had a lot of interventions. They've had a lot of treatment. They've seen a lot of different people. They may be very fed up with telling their story, frankly. And also, I think people get concerned that I'm going to tell them that it's all in their head.
Yeah.
Which I am, but I'm not, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think, but that's compounded by the misunderstandings of mindfulness as well.
Yeah.
You experience pain in the head, and practice mindfulness by looking inwards and controlling where your attention goes. And then so quickly people talk about, well, my attention's all over the place and I can't concentrate and focus when I'm in pain anyway. So it all gets confused. And so I think you simplified it so well in so much of that presentation.
And it's also, people I think may also have reservations, because actually when you're in a lot of pain, you can't concentrate very easily. If you think you're going to have to sit, that's going to put you off. I used to joke that I knew who were the people with the biggest problem. If I walked into my waiting room in my chiropractic clinic and there's a new patient there and they're standing up because they don't want to sit down, because moving from standing, it was bad enough getting out of the car, they don't want to sit down again if they're going to have to stand up again in a minute. I've taken histories with people standing up or lying down, because so if you think as well, that mindfulness is going to mean you've got to be able to sit, and you might even have to be able to sit on the floor. It's kind of a bit of a non-starter, really.
Yeah. So Janet's just sent a message to everybody, so hopefully everybody's in. So additional challenges when a client has been sent. Has been sent after an accident. The motivation to manage their pain is then linked to the financial remuneration that may be possible if the pain persists. Any ideas? Oh, that's an interesting one. Thanks, Janet, for that.
Yeah, that's one we go around the houses of, Janet. I'm a chiropractor as well as a mindfulness teacher, and it's always an interesting one. The why somebody is in front of you is really, really important. And yes, there are complications if the reason they're in front of you is because they've had an accident and there is a pending claim. It's a difficult one, and I've encountered it in different ways in my chiropractic practice, and it doesn't always play the same way with everybody. Some people do make progress anyway, but sometimes the psychological driver to make sure that this stays as bad as it is to justify as big a payout as they get. You get similar types of problem if somebody is off work because of pain. Remember a discussion once in a professional development about if somebody comes to you with back pain and they're off work, and at the end of the treatment they're not in pain but they don't go back to work, was that a successful treatment? It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. And I think there's other issues around why people are. I'm always kind of a little careful because I get quite a lot of people come to me who come as referrals through other people. I joke a bit that I've become a bit the mindfulness teacher for the grumpy old man in your life. And I keep getting desperate daughters and daughters-in-law going, could you have a word with my father? Now, I've actually had quite a lot of success with said grumpy old men, but when I always do an initial conversation with them, because the last thing I want is somebody who's basically been forced to be there. I haven't come across this as much with mindfulness. I've come across it in my chiropractic work where it's another member of the family who's decided that the person needs an appointment. It's not a good starting point. So I tend to actually do a complimentary chat with the person just to make sure that this really is something that they feel they can be open to, because conversely, recent piece of research in Psychology Today about what are the barriers to using mindfulness for pain. And one of the barriers is the family need to be supportive. And actually, if the family are supportive of the person trying mindfulness, much more likely to be effective. So oddly enough, we seem to have a situation where the family badgering somebody can potentially be a good thing. But you just have to be careful about circumstances.
Alison asked a question as well as a kind of follow-on, which is, she says herself, is probably subjective. How long does it take to change communication in the brain and potentially impact on pain? And before you answer, Alison, if you don't mind, I want to jump in as a fellow mindfulness teacher, but also someone who suffers from chronic pain. I have Crohn's disease, and it varies is my answer to that, and it varies depending on a whole raft of different things. But when I first got Crohn's disease, before I knew it was Crohn's disease, when I didn't know what it was, I used mindfulness, and it was really, really effective in helping me calm the pain and changed my relationship with my, this is going to sound a little bit weird, changed my relationships with my intestines, because I started talking to them. And saying it's going to be all right. This will pass. Don't worry about it. I know you're struggling. I know you're in pain. I can hear you, but it's going to be all right. And that actually changed the way I responded to the pain when it came. So the next time the pain, the cramping pains happened, it was, oh yeah, I hear you again. But it wasn't, I didn't tense up as much around the pain. I didn't jerk physically as much. It just started changing gradually by responding. I mentioned the autopilot, instead of automatically responding by grabbing where it hurt, and instead cuddling where it hurts and saying, being kind, responding with kindness rather than the anger of, I wish it wasn't there. Over time changed it, and over certainly the hospital admission and times in hospital, it helped make that so much more bearable. But it doesn't always work. And there have been other times when it hasn't worked for me. So yeah, there is no easy answer. I don't know what you would like to share with that.
I'd say that there's actually two answers. The moment you change how you view the situation, there's an instantaneous recordable response in the brain. All right. And the study at San Diego Medical Center, where they showed a 57% reduction and a change in the communication, you were only talking 4 sessions. Okay. What I would say, this is the caveat, this is the second part of the answer, is that there's a difference between being able in the moment to measure a change in communication and over time embedding that change so that the new patterns become more wired in. Now, I read a study once that was looking at people learning Braille as adults. And the question they were asking is, how long did it take for if people were doing practice during the week, but not practicing over a weekend, how long before the changes in the sensitivity of the fine finger movement and the motor control up in the brain, how long for that to really become wired? If people were like, they were practicing from Monday to Friday, so you'd see changes Monday to Friday, but what you'd then see is Friday to the following Monday, everything would revert. How long before it didn't revert? About 6 months. But you do, in time, get permanent change. I can't remember what the law's called, but it basically says neurons that fire together wire together. And you train a new set of firing and wiring. And I didn't get into it today, but we retain the ability right through life to prune the nervous system in some ways and grow it in others. And it's not easy to grow permanent change, but it is possible.
Thank you, Alison. Yeah, actually, that makes, in terms of my own experience, it's very much, I practiced and it worked. And then I was okay for a few years. And then when it came back, I forgot. Oh, I reverted back to my old ways, and then I got back on track again, and that cycle has happened a couple of times. And yeah, we're human beings, and we all are. I sometimes liken what you said about the wiring of the brain, like walking across a field. If there's already a path, you're going to follow that path. But if you follow a different path over time, a new path will appear, and the old one will overgrow. But there's still always going to be the tendency to follow the one you can see.
Mark, I tend to talk, having lived in India, that picture at the beginning of the presentation is jungle. Just so you know, jungle is just the Hindi word for forest. And I actually don't liken it to a path across a field. I liken it to trying to take a machete to make a path in a jungle. Because it is that difficult when you're trying. And you will keep going back to oh, no, I don't want to be at the end. No, yeah, that's just normal. Yeah. It's human.
Yeah. Thank you, Alison. And thank you, everybody. We've got a few more minutes. I know Alison said she can talk for England, and I could as well, and it would be great to stay on all day, but I don't think we can. And yeah, so I definitely need to get back and spend some quality time with my daughter who's visiting for the weekend. But it will be recorded. It will be shared. Anybody who wants a copy of the recording, let me know, and I will send it to you. And just thank you so much again. A couple of minutes though, just in case anyone else has any questions for Alison.
Or if anybody's got any questions afterwards, if they think of things afterwards or things that perhaps didn't quite make sense, please just just email me or message me on one of my social media channels. I'm happy to answer always.
And as most of you, or some of you, are hopefully aware, this is part of a sequence, part of a series where we're going to have a one-off summit, and instead we've gone down a lecture route, and there's going to be at least 9 or 10 of these. Next month it's going to be there's going to be Penny Edwards from Rape Crisis Tyneside, Northumberland, talking about mindfulness and dealing with trauma. And that's hopefully going to be an excellent talk as well. And then the week after, Mark Cieslik is going to talk about community and mindfulness. He's a researcher from Newcastle University. And then there's more in the new year. Keep an eye on the website. We will keep on updating. But now you've been to one, you will automatically get an email from me saying there's another one coming. So yeah, look forward to seeing you all again. I'll be hosting the ones from the speakers that I have the contacts with, and Rachel will be hosting the ones that she has the contacts with. So I won't be at the next two, actually. Although I might come along as a participant to Mark's. Don't think I can. I'll have to check either whether or not it is female only for the Penny one. I'm not sure. Okay, so thank you. Hopefully you all have a lovely evening and take away something from that. I suppose the only question, the one other question I would ask Alison, I suppose, which maybe, you know, for my own personal use and maybe for each and everyone else's, is there a particular meditation that you would recommend for people in dealing with pain?
I can't say fairer than the body scan, to be honest. It's not always the easiest one for people to do, but that art of being able to move into an area, whether you breathe into it, whether you view it visually, like I had a client who used to see it as like a golden light moving around. But that willingness to move into the body is very challenging for people in pain, but very rewarding, because it's an immediate way to be able to build a bit of confidence and to get over some of the anxiety about it by moving up close.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Okay, so take care, everybody, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.